At some point, you just stopped. You stopped texting back as fast. You stopped making plans you knew you'd cancel. You stopped showing up to things that had started to feel like a performance. Smiling at the right moments, laughing at the right time. Asking questions you didn't really want answers to, and then slowly, quietly, you stopped altogether. No dramatic goodbye, no big explanation, just a slow fade, and the strangest part, nobody really noticed at first, which told you something. Today we're going to talk about the psychology of people who cut everyone off, not the dramatic version. Not the version where someone snaps and burns everything down. The quieter version where someone reaches a point where they just choose a smaller life. Less people, less noise, and somehow more peace than they've felt in years. If that's you, or if you're trying to understand someone who did this, stay with me, because what's actually happening underneath this behavior is a lot more human than most people realize. Here's the thing most people get wrong about this. They assume the person who cut everyone off is lonely, suffering, waiting for someone to reach out and bring them back. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of the time it isn't. A lot of the time the person who disappeared is the most at peace they've been in years, and that peace confuses people. It almost makes them angry. So why does cutting people off sometimes feel like relief instead of loss? That's what we're going to get into before any of this happened. There was a version of you who tried harder than most people will ever know. You were the one who remembered things, who checked in after hard conversations, who drove across town when someone needed help even when you were tired. You were the person people could count on. And for a while that felt good. It felt like you mattered, like you were genuinely woven into people's lives. But somewhere along the way, you started noticing something. A small, uncomfortable pattern, one you kept pushing down because you didn't want it to be true. When you needed something, really needed it, the calls were shorter, the texts came slower, the excuses came faster. People were busy, people had their own stuff. They'd definitely catch up with you soon, they didn't. And you kept showing up anyway, because that's who you were. There's a moment, and it's different for everyone, where something inside you just recalibrates. It's not always a big event. Sometimes it's a small one. Someone forgets something important to you. You hear about a conversation you weren't included in. You sit alone at the end of a hard day and realize there's no one you actually want to call. Not because no one exists, but because the calls always leave you feeling worse than before. And something in you quietly says, enough, not in anger, more like a tired kind of clarity, like your mind had been keeping score for years without telling you, and it finally showed you the tally. Psychologists talk about something called emotional exhaustion. It's the state you reach when you've been giving out energy for a long time with very little coming back. And your nervous system responds to this the same way it responds to any kind of prolonged drain. It starts pulling back. It starts conserving. It starts creating distance between you and the thing that's costing you. In this case, that thing is other people. This isn't coldness. It isn't cruelty. It's your system saying, I've been running on empty for a long time, and I need to stop. Here's the part that disturbs people the most. You're fine, not just coping, actually fine. You sleep better. You don't wake up with that low-level anxiety that used to follow you around. You have more energy. You notice things again. You feel lighter. And when people find out, when they realize you've gone quiet, pulled back, maybe disappeared entirely, they expect you to be miserable. They're waiting for you to come back and say you made a mistake, but you don't. And they don't understand that. What they're missing is what it actually cost you to maintain those connections. The constant mental tracking, always being aware of someone else's mood, always making yourself smaller or more available or more agreeable than you really were. Always performing a version of yourself that fit comfortably into everyone else's idea of who you should be. When you stopped, that performance ended. And the relief you felt wasn't the relief of giving up. It was the relief of finally putting down something very heavy that you'd been carrying for a very long time. This is where it gets harder to look at directly, because once the noise settled, you started to see things more clearly. And what you saw was that a lot of those relationships had only existed because you were holding them up. The moment you stopped reaching out, they stopped entirely. No one came looking, no one wondered where you'd gone, or if they did, not enough to actually do anything about it. And that realization, that one, is its own kind of grief. Not grief for the people themselves, but grief for the idea of them, for what you thought those friendships were, for the closeness you believed existed that, when you actually look at it, was mostly just your own effort circling back to you. You weren't in a friendship, you were in a habit. A social arrangement that worked because you kept it running. And that quietly dissolved the moment you stepped back. A lot of people spend time feeling guilty about this, like they abandoned someone, but it's worth asking, who was actually doing the abandoning? long before you ever left. Here's something that doesn't get talked about much. When you cut everyone off, you also cut off the version of yourself that existed inside those relationships. The funny one, the reliable one, the one who always had it together, the one who played a specific role in every dynamic, and for a while you might not know who you are without those roles. That's uncomfortable. It can actually feel like loss, even when nothing outside of you has disappeared. Because something inside you is shifting, you're in a kind of in-between space. Not fully the old version of yourself, not yet sure who comes next. Some people panic here and go back. They reestablish connections they don't actually want just to feel solid again, just to feel like they exist in relation to someone. But if you can sit in that quiet long enough, something starts to happen. You start to hear yourself again, what you actually think, what you actually want, what kind of day feels good when you're not factoring in anyone else's needs or moods or expectations. You start just being yourself, not performing, not managing, just existing. And for someone who spent years being the emotional anchor for everyone around them, that feeling is extraordinary. There's something worth being honest about here. When we pull back from everyone, we don't always have perfect aim. In your exhaustion and your need to just get out and breathe, you probably created distance from some people who didn't deserve it. People who were trying, who weren't perfect but were genuinely there in ways you might not have fully seen at the time. That's worth sitting with, not as a reason to undo everything, but as something to hold with a little care, because the goal, if there is one, isn't permanent isolation. It's clarity about which connections are actually real, and sometimes that clarity only comes after a period of quiet that feels more extreme than it needs to be. The cutting off isn't always the final destination. Sometimes it's just the only way to get enough silence to hear yourself think again. People will call you avoidant, antisocial, damaged. They'll say you've given up on connection, like you failed some social requirement the rest of the world is quietly passing. But here's a different way to see it. Most people spend their whole lives in relationships that are half real. They stay out of habit, out of guilt, out of the quiet, fear of being alone. They show up to things they dread. They keep people in their lives who consistently make them feel invisible because ending it feels harder than just tolerating it. You did something most people are too afraid to do. You looked honestly at what your relationships were actually giving you, and when the answer was very little, you stopped pretending otherwise. That's not a failure of connection, that's a refusal to accept a counterfeit version of it. And the loneliness that people worry about, that hollow, terrible feeling of being completely alone, a lot of people who cut everyone off will tell you they felt that most intensely when they were still surrounded by people, sitting in a room full of friends who didn't really know them. Being in a relationship and still feeling fundamentally unseen, the silence that came after wasn't lonelier. It was just more honest. So if you're someone who's done this, who's pulled back, gone quiet, let things fall away, here's what's actually true about you. You gave a lot for a long time to people who didn't match your effort, and at some point, your mind and body just stopped pretending that was okay. That's not dysfunction. That's a self-protective response to a real pattern. You found out that a lot of your relationships only existed as long as you maintained them, and discovering that, as painful as it was, gave you something important. Clarity. Clarity about what real connection actually needs to look like for you. You found something in the quiet that you couldn't find in the noise. Maybe yourself, maybe just room to breathe. Either way, that matters. And the version of you that exists on the other side of all this, the one who is quieter, more selective, less willing to perform closeness, they don't feel that version isn't broken. That version is honest. And honesty, it turns out, is the only real foundation that genuine connection can be built on. Not everyone who goes through this stays alone. Some people come back slowly, with better instincts, higher standards, a clearer sense of what they actually need from another person. And when they find that, it tends to be the realest thing they've ever had. If something in here felt familiar, if it names something you've been carrying quietly, I'd genuinely like to hear from you. Leave a comment, even just a word or two. You don't have to explain the whole thing. And if this video found you in the middle of it, still figuring out what the quiet means, subscribe if you want to keep going. This channel is for people who think carefully about the way they move through the world. You'll fit right in. Now, here's something worth sitting with before the next video. A lot of people who go through this, who cut everyone off and find peace in it, eventually start wondering something, not whether they made the right call, not whether they should go back. They start wondering, why does connection feel so much harder for me than it seems to for everyone else? And the answer to that question usually starts a long time before any of this. In patterns that were written so early, most people don't even know they're still following them. That's the next one.